What's the creepiest experience of your life that you still can't explain? Story 1. One night when I was about 16 years old, I swear I glitched into the Matrix or something. I had finally decided to get off my computer and go to bed, around 2 ante-meridium if memory serves me correctly. At that time, my family and I lived in a decently sized 2-story house. The staircase to the second floor was pretty basic. You head up a few steps, turn on a landing halfway up, traverse the remaining few steps, and at the top, you are only a couple of footfalls from my bedroom door. Someone please explain to me then how I got lost on this staircase. Sure, it was dark, but even then, you would have to be a special kind of stupid to not know how to walk up these stairs after you have already done it 1,000 times before. Just keep one hand on the railing, and you do not need to use your eyes. I swear that as soon as I reached the landing, I spent 10 minutes just continually walking upwards. Realistically, it only takes someone 5 to 7 seconds to walk up these stairs, 3 if they are running or skipping steps. I realized I had been walking for much longer than that, stopped, and immediately felt uneasy. I had walked up those stairs in pitch-black darkness so many times before, but even with my hand on the railing, I was getting nowhere, just endlessly walking upwards, and my skin crawled. If my brother had not turned on the upstairs hallway light, I am not sure I would have made it to my bedroom. He blinked sleepily at me and asked me if I was okay, and all I could say was that I legitimately had no idea. I told him the next day what had happened, and he told me that the reason he had come out of his room in the first place was because he had heard footsteps on the stairs for several minutes. What was that? I was not so tired that I just mindlessly walked up and down the stairs for a while. I was completely awake, and not once did it suddenly feel like I had turned around to walk back downstairs at any time. I still get chills thinking about it. Story 2. Years ago, my buddy and a friend of his were out in the middle of nowhere, lighting off fireworks for the 4th of July. We went out to the cars to light the stick for igniting the fireworks. As my buddy's friend was in the car doing so, I looked up at all the stars, completely unused to seeing so many. As I was looking, something just felt off. I finally pinpointed it and started squinting my eyes, looking away and back, doing everything I could think of to make sure that I was seeing what I thought I was seeing. It was one point of light absolutely identical to the stars around it, except for one strange detail. It was doing a steady, repeating figure 8. I turned to my buddy to ask him about it and saw him staring at the same area of sky, so I asked him if he saw what I was seeing. I had not said a word about what I saw, but he answered back that it was a star doing a figure 8. I have tried to explain it by every logical means over the years, but nothing quite matches up, and I refuse to accept that a figure 8 in space is the alien teenager version of doing donuts in a parking lot. Story 3. When I was 9 years old, my best friend and I were crossing a busy street on the way home from school. Normally we were careful, but I was distracted by a black cat following us down the road. We stopped and she bent down to pet him while I turned around to cross the street, not thinking to look both ways. A silver car was directly to my right, about to hit me, and I froze like a deer in headlights while my friend was screaming. Then suddenly it was on my left. It did not swerve and was not in another lane. The car was just suddenly on my other side, speeding away. I ran across the rest of the road, and my friend asked how I had passed through the car. Everything looked a bit strange. Her shape was fuzzy and doubled. It was a clear day and the sun was shining, even though it had been overcast and windy on the other side of the road. When I glanced back, the black cat was staring at me from the other side, and then he just strolled away. I know it was probably just an optical illusion, and that I had missed the car by a fraction of a second and was rattled afterward, but I thought about it for years. Story 4. I lived in my parents' 2-story house, where the living room connected directly to the stairs leading to the second floor, and you could see completely down the hallway upstairs from the couch in the living room. One time my family went away on vacation, so I had my cousin come over while I house sat, since I had been alone in the house for a couple of days and really wanted company. We were sitting on the couch playing Xbox or something similar, and the stairs leading to the second floor were almost out of my vision. At the very top of the stairs on the left was a doorway leading to a bathroom and nothing else. We were up pretty late gaming when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a gray face lean out and stare at me for a split second. I did not move. I barely even registered it. But as soon as I did, it was gone. I did not snap my head to look at it and did not say anything, just continued gaming for about 3 seconds until my cousin asked if I had just seen that. As soon as our eyes met, we both knew we had seen the same thing. The moment my cousin said that, I felt my heart sink, and it terrified me to have him confirm what I saw, even though I tried to brush it off by assuming it was just one of those blurs or darting shadows you sometimes see in the corner of your eyes. The creepiest part was that it slid out as if it were lying on the floor, and whatever it was, its head was level with the top of the steps, right at the bottom of the bathroom door frame. It slid out, stared, then slid back, and although I only saw it from the corner of my eye, it appeared to be gray skin with black hair based on our combined description. We went upstairs and checked the entire bathroom, including inside the luggage bags in the closet, but we never found anything. Story 5. I was at my parents' house staying over for the weekend and woke up in the morning with the urge to look up old classmates on Facebook. There was a girl I had kind of liked in band class who was a grade under me, who my brother's friends knew, but I had never talked to her. I decided to look her up along with a few others on Facebook to see what she was like now, several years later. We had graduated from a large suburban high school, and I had not thought about her much since then. A few minutes after viewing her page, the phone at my parents' house rang. I lazily walked over to see if my parents or my brother were calling. I picked it up and checked the caller identification and froze in horror when I read her name on the display. Immediately, I started thinking that I must have done something without realizing it while on her Facebook page that alerted her and somehow triggered her call. I could not answer it. I verified the number shown on the caller identification with Facebook and confirmed it was indeed her, then sat there in shock, completely stunned by how this unlikely event had happened and wondering why she would be calling. My brother arrived at my parents' house a little later, and I told him who had called. He actually had her number saved on his phone and sent her a message asking why she had called our parents' house. She replied that she had not intentionally called at all and that it had simply been an accidental pocket dial. Story 6. When I was between 9 and 10 years old, I used to play football with my friends every weekend. One day, a guy, probably around 18 or 19 years old, joined us out of nowhere. He was wearing a karate uniform and played with us for a while, but he did not know how to play football and instead just threw karate kicks everywhere. For some reason, I never forgot his face. Fast forward 15 years, and I was in college when I saw this same karate guy walking around, and I recognized him immediately. About a week later, I decided to take a trip with my girlfriend to a city 3 hours away from home. We went for a walk around the city, and there he was again, the karate guy, sitting on the grass next to a park and kissing another man. I thought it was strange and told my girlfriend about it, but she said it was probably just my imagination. The following week, I traveled with my family to our annual beach vacation, which was 2 hours by plane from home. I went out partying with my cousins at a bar, and at some point I stepped outside to smoke. At the exact same moment, guess who walked through the door? Our eyes met for about 3 seconds. He did not recognize me, but I was completely stunned to see him again. I ended up calling my girlfriend at 3 ante Meridium to tell her about it, and she thought I was losing my mind. I know coincidences can happen, but to me it felt like a glitch in the Matrix. I later moved to another continent, and if I ever see the karate guy again, I am going to completely lose it. Story 7. My husband worked at a small elderly care home that only had 3 residents, and his aunt ran the place. I had college classes nearby and would often come by for a few hours at the end of his shift to spend time there and visit with the residents. One night, my husband got the residents into bed and went downstairs to collect his paycheck while I stayed behind turning off the lights. As I reached the top of the stairs, I turned to look down the hallway leading to the residents' rooms. Standing outside the room of one of the residents was a woman wearing an old pale green, Victorian-style dress with her ear pressed against the door. I opened my mouth to say something, and she turned to look directly at me, raised a finger to her lips, and motioned for me to be quiet. I turned around and nearly fell down the stairs in panic. When I reached the owner's office, she took one look at my face and said that I had seen the woman in green, not as a question, but as a statement. I confirmed it, and she asked whose room the woman had been standing outside of. When I told her, she nodded and sighed. The next morning, the owner called us to let us know that the resident in question had been found unresponsive in her bed. She passed away later that same day. Story 8. When I was 7 months pregnant with my first baby, my granddad, the man who helped raise me, passed away, so my daughter never met him, and I honestly did not speak of him much because it was too painful for me. As a baby, she would often wave and smile toward our hallway if she was sitting on my bed. I thought she was looking at flickering sunlight, but then she would wave and giggle at the same spot no matter where she was in the house. When she was a toddler, she would say things like that she was sorry she could not play because she had to eat her breakfast, or that someone was making her laugh. When I asked her who she was talking to, she would just say it was the nice man, so I assumed it was an imaginary friend. This only happened about once a month or so. When my daughter was 2 years old, I had another baby, and my mother came to stay with us for a while. And my older daughter started talking to this man every day at breakfast, always facing the hallway where the sunlight came in. I heard her telling him about her new sister. My mother was amused listening to her and asked who it was. I expected her to just say the nice man like she always did, but instead she looked my mother straight in the eye, pointed at her, and said that it was her daddy and told her to say hello. My mother dropped the cup of tea she was making and stood there speechless, and I was the same. As I said, I do not believe in ghosts, but at the same time my daughter never met him, and if I ever referred to him, I would have called him my granddad, so my toddler would never have known he was my mother's father. My mother filled up with tears and asked if she could tell him hello back, and my daughter simply said okay and continued eating her cereal. It was so unsettling that I will never forget it. She is 4 years old now and still sometimes says hello to the nice man in the hallway when the sun shines through. Story 9. Both my wife and I went camping at a campsite near a desert ghost town. We went on a weekday, so there was no one around other than the rangers who stopped by near evening to collect fees. Toward evening, a man in a van decided to camp near us, which felt strange considering how much open space there was. That night, during our campfire, he sat in his van with the back door cracked open, just watching. We made a point of noticing him but kept enjoying our night. During the night while we were asleep, I kept hearing someone walking around our tent, and it is hard to walk on desert gravel without making noise. I woke up suddenly and sat up, and my wife did the same. And as soon as we did, the walking stopped. We both sat there waiting for it to continue and stayed awake for about an hour. But there were no more footsteps. Eventually, I worked up the courage to get out of the tent and look around. But no one was near the tent, and the van was still parked at the other campsite. We went back to bed, and by the next morning, the van was gone. What was even more unsettling was that there were footprints all around our tent that did not match ours. Ever since then, I am much more cautious during camping trips. Story 10. 2 days after one of my closest and dearest friends died, which we had been partially expecting after he was in a terrible accident, I fell asleep in the library at school. This was after a horrific couple of days trying to process everything and function normally, and I was extremely sleep deprived. I laid my head in my arms on the library desk, and when I woke up, he was there beside me. It was a scenario that had happened so many times before, with us studying and spending time together in the library, whispering jokes and casual banter, that it did not feel strange at all. We stood up and wandered around, watched a librarian putting books back on the shelves, and noticed a girl reading a book while sitting on the floor with bright yellow socks. My friend made a silly joke about them being too loud for the library. We talked quietly about nothing important, just the usual conversation, and then went back to the desks. When I woke up again, he was gone. I was startled but strangely uplifted. I walked past the same shelves and felt a sense of familiarity when I saw the same librarian putting books away and the same girl with the yellow socks still sitting on the floor reading. To this day, I swear I had not seen them before I fell asleep. I like to think it was his way of saying goodbye, and it helped me more than I can explain, even though I know it was probably just a dream. The detail about the socks has always stayed with me, and whenever I see a pair of bright yellow socks, which is not very often, I think of him and our final conversation. Story 11. I was walking to a train station in The Hague at 4 ante meridiem in order to get to the airport for a flight. I was already alert when I noticed a man across the street walking in my direction. He crossed the road and began walking beside me. Normally, this would have made me very uneasy, but for some reason it did not. He asked me in English if I was American, and I replied that I was Italian. We continued talking in Italian until we reached the train station. I said something along the lines of thanking him and wishing him a safe trip, and I went inside. I then turned around to ask him a question and realized that he had not entered the station with me. I walked back outside, and he had vanished. This particular station had no nearby buildings, and there was nowhere he could have gone without me seeing him, especially in such a short amount of time. I walked around for a while to see if I could find him, but there was no sign of him at all. I am not particularly religious, but a habit from my childhood was saying a short prayer for a safe journey before a long trip. I was nervous enough that morning to say one, and less than 2 minutes later, the man appeared again. Story 12. This happened probably about 5 years ago. I was asleep in my room when my eyes suddenly opened at around 2:30 ante meridiem, and I was instantly wide awake, not groggy at all. My senses felt heightened, and it felt strongly like someone or something was in my room with me. In the darkness, I could see the outline of something underneath my desk. It looked almost like a very tiny man, maybe about a foot tall, give or take. At that point, I was completely confused but not truly scared until I saw it start to move out from under my desk and across my room. The light switch was right next to my bed, so I decided that in one quick motion, I would turn on the light and jump toward it the second it got close. When it reached my bed, I fumbled with the light switch and missed my chance to grab it, and I swear I watched this thing pass straight through my bedroom wall. I just sat there on my bed trying to process what had just happened. My brother's room was directly on the other side of that wall, and about 10 minutes later he knocked on my door and came in. The first thing he asked me was whether I had just seen a tiny human figure in my room. I was completely shocked and told him that I had. He then told me that he had just watched something dart across his room, as if it came through the wall and then disappeared through another wall and outside. Saying I was stunned would be an understatement, but I was also relieved that I was not imagining things. About a year later, I was driving and listening to a late-night radio show when the host had a guest who began describing an experience that was almost identical to what my brother and I had seen. I have not done much research on it since, but if anyone else has ever seen this little man or whatever it was, I would honestly love to hear about it. Story 13. My truck completely locked up while I was driving. I could not turn the steering wheel, press the brake or accelerator, change gears, roll down the windows, change the locks, pull the emergency brake, or even change the radio station. Nothing worked. I was trapped in a vehicle that could only be stopped by crashing. I was stuck going 55 miles per hour, and my steering wheel was locked at about a 35-degree angle the entire time. Eventually, the truck jumped a curb at such a high speed that it flew into a wall, and the vehicle actually lifted off the ground. After the crash, I was finally able to unlock the door, and witnesses helped me get out. No one believed my explanation. People assumed I was suicidal, having a medical emergency, or intoxicated because I made no visible attempt to stop the truck. However, I passed the field sobriety test and a quick medical evaluation by emergency responders. Police officers even thought I might have been distracted by my phone, but it was in my gym bag behind my seat the entire time. To this day, no one believes me when I say that my truck spontaneously locked up, especially since it has not happened again in the past 3 years. Story 14. When I was little, my dad would sometimes sleep in my bed with me, and there was nothing strange about it. If my sister or I got scared after watching a horror movie or something similar, we would go sleep in my parents' bed. But as we got older, it became uncomfortable, especially for my mom, who would always end up in the middle between my dad and either my sister, me, or both of us. Eventually, my dad would just sleep in my bed instead. This stopped around age 10, which was also when my grandfather passed away. Fast forward to when I was around 13 or 14 years old. One Saturday night, everyone went to bed, but my dad stayed up late drinking a few beers and listening to his old vinyl records. I woke up in the middle of the night or early morning and felt trapped between my blankets and a heavy body next to me, pressed against the wall so I could barely move. I did not panic because I was certain it was my dad, and I recognized his presence, although I found it strange that he would be sleeping in my bed again after so many years. I assumed he had maybe had too much to drink or did not realize where he was, or that my mom had sent him out of their room, so I went back to sleep. In the morning, I woke up and could still feel the weight beside me, the impression in the mattress, the warmth, and even his breathing, which sounded almost like snoring. Since I could not climb over him and did not want to wake him, I carefully slid toward the foot of the bed, stood up, and glanced back to make sure he had not stirred. When I went downstairs, I saw both my mom and my dad in the kitchen, with my dad making coffee. My stomach dropped instantly. I ran back upstairs to my room and there was nothing on my bed at all. No body, no shifted blankets, nothing, except my side of the covers slightly lifted near the wall. I started crying, trying to understand what had happened, because I could accept that during the night I might have dreamed it. But in the morning I was fully awake and had clearly felt the weight, the breathing, and the shape under the blankets. I never told my parents because I was too afraid of the answer. And for years, I tried to convince myself that it had really been my dad, and I had just misunderstood. As time passed, that explanation made less sense, and I tried to forget about it until many years later, when I saw my dad sleeping completely covered from head to toe, and the memory came rushing back. Even now, I try crushing and rearranging my blankets to recreate what I felt that morning, but there is no way I can make it look or feel like there was a body under them. Story 15. I was out at night helping my friend, who was taking filming classes, with setting things up for a horror project he was working on. We were filming an old, rundown shed that was occasionally used by homeless people. There were 4 of us in total, all around 17 to 18 years old, as we were still in 6th form at the time. The shed was deep in the woods, and since I was not sure how long we would be out there, I packed a drink, some snacks, and a strange combined radio and torch. The radio part had never worked, not even when it was new, but the torch itself worked well, and it was the only one I had, so I brought it along. After meeting up, we walked through the woods toward the shed for about half an hour, and at some point I realized just how quiet everything was. Aside from our own voices, there were no background sounds at all, no wind, no insects, no animals, nothing. When we reached the shed and started setting up, one of the other guys commented on how quiet it was, and immediately after that, we heard what sounded like a pig squealing. At the exact same moment, the radio on my torch suddenly turned on at full volume, blasting static mixed with a foreign language for about 10 seconds, and then it shut off completely. After that, there was silence again. We filmed what we needed as fast as possible and got out of there. I had never been able to get the radio on that torch to work before or since, and I lost it a long time ago, but the unnatural quiet of that night still really unsettles me. Story 16. I do not believe in the supernatural or the afterlife, but there is one incident I truly cannot explain or dismiss as coincidence. A few years ago, a schoolmate of mine committed suicide. On the evening it happened, I was at home playing computer games on the couch, and feeling tired, I decided to take a nap. I had a dream about this schoolmate where he was talking to me in a friendly way, saying that he had seen me around school, but that we had never spoken before. I was not friends with him and had never exchanged a single word with him, and with more than 400 other students at the school, his appearance in my dream felt strange to say the least. I woke up, did not think much of it, and went back to playing my game. The next day during recess, I heard a group of friends saying that someone named John had committed suicide the day before. Because it was crowded and noisy, I initially misheard the name as something else, which confused me because I did not think anyone by that name even attended our school. Even so, the first person who came to my mind was John. I had mostly forgotten about the dream by that point, but my friend then corrected the name, and I immediately felt chills run through me. I later found out that John had taken his life in the evening, around the exact time I had been asleep and dreaming. That dream was the only interaction I ever had with him. Story 17. I was out with some friends at a local bar and drank far too much. Instead of driving straight home, I decided to stop at Jack in the Box to get some food. I made it through the drive-thru and started heading back. About 2 blocks from my house, I got pulled over, and I was clearly intoxicated. As soon as the police lights came on, I felt a wave of reality hit me, and the first thing I thought about was how upset my dad would be, both angry and disappointed. I pulled over, turned on the interior light, and tried to get my insurance paperwork, but I was too drunk to find it properly. The officer did not even ask for my license or registration. The first thing he said was whether I had been drinking. In my drunk and ashamed state, I immediately admitted that I had. He asked where I was going, and I told him my address, which was literally a straight shot 2 blocks away. He told me that I had been swerving all over the road, and I agreed. He said it was incredibly stupid, told me never to do it again, made me promise that I would not, and then told me to go home. He was clearly angry. The confusion, relief, and guilt I felt afterward were overwhelming. I often think that him letting me go may have had a bigger impact on my life than if I had been arrested. I have never driven under the influence since, and never will. That moment, the brief realization of how badly I could have disappointed my family and ruined my life, is burned into my memory, and it made me understand how easy it is to avoid making such a reckless decision by planning ahead. Story 18. You know that feeling that someone is staring at you, except imagine it intensified tenfold, like a group of people suddenly focusing all their attention on the back of your neck. I felt that sensation twice, right before something went wrong, and I used to call it the eyes when talking about it with my friends. The first time happened while I was walking through thick snow with my dogs, and the feeling stopped me in my tracks. My dog kept going, and only a few steps ahead he fell straight through ice into a body of water I did not even know existed there. I still do not know whether it was a small river or a pond, because I did not stay to investigate. I had a dog to pull out of freezing water and needed to rush home so he would not freeze. And when I tried to find the same spot during the summer, I could not find any water where I thought it had been. The second time, I felt the same sensation again while walking through a forest. But I ignored it. The ground gave way beneath my leg, and my foot became briefly trapped in what felt like an animal tunnel. I badly twisted my ankle and had to hop all the way home using a large tree branch as a makeshift cane, but I eventually recovered. I have felt that sensation a few times since then, and now I immediately leave the situation when it happens. I do not know if my instincts are just unusually good at sensing unstable ground, but the feeling of being watched is terrifying, and it is unsettling how clearly I seem to know something bad was about to happen just before it did. Story 19. I have an aunt whose house is supposedly haunted. It used to be a funeral home before another family converted it into a regular house and farmed the surrounding cornfield, and an elderly woman reportedly died after falling down the stairs. Several members of my family have seen strange things there over the years, with the staircase and the upstairs living room being the main areas where activity seems to happen, and my aunt has grown used to it. My mother once became extremely frightened when she saw what she thought was my cousin running up the stairs and yelled at her to stop, only for my cousin to immediately appear from the downstairs living room, asking what was wrong. I know personal stories like this are unreliable and easy to misinterpret, and I do not expect anyone to believe what I saw myself. One time I saw what looked like an orb that was too large to be dust and did not move with my eyes the way glare usually does. But there are reasonable explanations like a large insect reflecting light, so I do not dwell on that. The stranger experience happened when my cousin was feeling especially uncomfortable in her bedroom, which was directly beneath the upstairs living room where most of the activity occurred. Since I am interested in these things from a scientific perspective, I offered to sit in the room with her and see if anything would happen. We went in. I asked aloud for anything present to do something, and nothing happened at first. I sat on the bed with my back against the wall and talked with my cousin for a while, and then there were 2 clear knocks on the wall directly behind me. I even felt the vibration, and we both jumped up to check the adjacent room to see if someone was playing a joke on us. But everyone else was on the opposite side of the house. We considered pipes as a possible explanation, but my cousin thought I might have knocked on the wall, which I absolutely did not. We went back into the room to see if anything else would happen, but nothing did, and eventually my aunt came in to check on us. The moment she entered the room, a very distinct canine growl came from the center of the space, and both my cousin and my aunt froze with wide eyes. I asked if they had heard it too, and my aunt calmly replied that the previous family who lived there had owned a dog. I do not know what that sound was. While ghosts are the obvious explanation, science relies on repeatable and verifiable evidence, and most attempts to provoke paranormal activity either fail or have alternative explanations. Still, three of us in different positions heard a sound that unmistakably resembled a dog growling from the middle of the room, and I do not have a satisfying natural explanation for it other than an unexplained sound or a shared auditory hallucination. Story 20. I went to the pharmacy to pick up my prescription and was told that it had already been collected earlier. To pick up a prescription at this pharmacy, you had to state your full name and date of birth and sign your name on a sheet of paper, after which a sticker identifying the prescription would be placed next to your signature. Given that process, I could not understand how someone else could have picked up my medication, but someone clearly had. The pharmacy had a security camera pointed at the counter, and they showed me footage of the person who collected my prescription, and he was a complete stranger. I assume the pharmacy technician must have been careless and failed to follow proper procedures, but the person would still have needed to provide a name because prescriptions were organized alphabetically by last name. That means some random person would have had to share both a first and last name similar to mine, have a prescription ready on the same day, and encounter a distracted technician who did not verify a date of birth, even though every single time I went there, they always asked for mine. Story 21. My granddad died when I was 6 years old, and my nan took it very hard at first, but after a few weeks, she became noticeably more cheerful. My dad spoke to her and asked how she was doing, and she said she was much better now that my granddad was back. When he asked her what she meant, she said exactly what she had said, that my granddad had been gone, but now he was back. She explained that he would come and sit in his favorite chair. She would put the television on for him, and the parrot would talk to him, a green parrot my granddad had bought on a whim from a pet shop a few years earlier. Not long after this began, some of the family went to my nan's house for Sunday lunch. My mom and aunt helped her cook, and we had all just sat down at the table getting ready to eat when we heard a door open and close upstairs, followed by footsteps moving down the hallway, then another door creaking open and closing. Everyone just looked at each other because there was no one else in the house besides the people sitting at the table. My nan then cheerfully announced, and I remember she looked directly at me and my sister as she said it, that it would be our granddad, and right at that moment the parrot started screaming his name over and over. My dad jumped up from the table and ran upstairs to check, and when he came back down a minute or two later, he shook his head and said there was nothing there, but he looked very pale. He sat back down and did not say another word, and we finished lunch in silence. Within a few months, my nan returned to normal and stopped talking about my granddad visiting, referring to him in the past tense again, as if she had accepted his death. There was another strange part of the story that my dad told us later, and while it is possible he made it up, I will include it anyway. Not long after the lunch incident, my nan was having a bad day, and my dad did not want to leave her alone, so he stayed the night. My granddad apparently had a habit where he could not stand seeing coins left unsorted, and if anyone dumped loose change on a table, he would feel compelled to neatly stack them into piles. That night, my dad emptied the coins from his pocket onto the dresser before bed, and when he woke up in the morning, the coins had been sorted and stacked into neat piles. Story 22. When I was a senior in college, I was at a small off-campus party with mostly close friends, probably around 25 to 30 people in total. There was a beer pong game going on that I was not playing in, but I was standing nearby watching and talking with friends. I was in the middle of a conversation when something extremely strange happened. Everyone was drinking from red plastic cups, and there was a keg. I did not have my drink in my hand at the time, but when I turned to grab it from the table in front of me, I noticed another friend had his hand hovering over my cup, and it looked like he was holding something between his fingers. As soon as he saw that I noticed him, he pulled his hand away and jokingly said that he was just dropping something into my drink. From what I saw, it genuinely looked like he had either dropped something in or was about to. Before I could question him, a female friend from across the table tried to get my attention while laughing in an odd, forced way, but I could not understand what she was trying to say. Before I could ask her to repeat herself or confront my other friend, another friend who was playing beer pong and was known for being loud suddenly started shouting song lyrics. By the time he reached the second line, everyone in the room joined in, shouting along at the same time, while I stood there making eye contact with multiple people and wondering what was happening. It felt like everyone was deliberately trying to distract me. I became extremely paranoid and unsettled, almost like a moment where everyone else was in on something except me. I was holding my drink but refused to drink it. Shortly afterward, the friend who had hovered over my cup, the friend who started shouting the lyrics, and another person at different moments all questioned why I was not drinking my beer. I became so uncomfortable that I went to the bathroom, poured the drink out, and left the party soon after, with my thoughts completely scrambled. I do not believe my group of college friends would have intentionally done something harmful, but the fact that so many people seemed involved in that bizarre sequence of events has never made sense to me. Even more than 21 years later, I still think about it and feel unsettled, because I have never been able to explain what happened or ask anyone about it afterward. Story 23. This is probably going to get buried because it is old, but here it goes. I had just graduated high school and moved back to the area where I grew up as a young child, moving in with my grandma. I had previously been seeing a chiropractor because of injuries and ongoing back issues, and I had recently been telling my grandma that I needed to find a new chiropractor in that area since my back was acting up again. Years of powerlifting without proper instruction and wrestling had taken a toll. That first weekend after I moved in, we went to the grocery store to buy some food. While I was in one of the aisles, a woman suddenly started talking to me as if we already knew each other. For a moment, I wondered if she might have been someone from the church I attended as a child. Out of nowhere, she told me that I should never go to a chiropractor. When I asked why, she said that adjustments can go wrong and told me about a young man she knew who had died after a spinal adjustment. I will admit that it unsettled me, especially since chiropractic care had previously helped me continue playing sports. She kept talking about people who had died after chiropractic treatments, even though there had been no lead up to the conversation other than her commenting that I looked athletic and might consider it. As soon as the conversation ended, my grandma walked up to me and asked what I had been doing. I told her I had just been talking to the woman standing there and mentioned how strange it was that she brought up chiropractors right after I had told my grandma an hour earlier that I needed to find one. My grandma asked what woman I was talking about because she had not seen anyone with me while I was looking through items in the aisle. I turned to point her out, but the woman was gone. I still do not know whether the conversation with my grandma lasted longer than I realized, or if something else happened. Story 24. This is a major source of shame and embarrassment for me, and I believe the experience was traumatic enough that my mind may have selectively erased parts of it to protect my ego, but this is how I remember it. I had just returned from the shooting range with my 9mm pistol and decided to give it a thorough cleaning. I took the gun apart, cleaned all the components, and reassembled it. There was no magazine in the firearm. I pulled the trigger and the gun fired. The bullet traveled through my house, damaged walls, and shattered a window, and I stood there in complete shock. I know there is no excuse for this, and you should never pull the trigger unless you intend to fire. But I was so convinced the gun was empty that I did something incredibly stupid. Here is the part that still bothers me. Based on how the slide and chamber work, it should not have been possible to reassemble the gun with a round already in the chamber. The slide would not have gone back into place unless the chamber was empty, which means I would have had to deliberately place a bullet directly into the chamber afterward. I have absolutely no memory of doing that. My memory goes from reassembling the slide straight to pulling the trigger. There was no magazine, so placing a round there would have required a conscious, careful action. I spiraled afterward because I could not understand how it happened. I eventually spoke to a psychologist who explained that it was possible I had blacked out briefly or that my mind had erased the memory of chambering the round as a way to cope with the shame. Even so, I still struggle with it because I cannot understand why I would intentionally place a bullet into the chamber and immediately fire it into my wall. It has been 3 years, and I have not touched that gun since, aside from moving the lock safe when I relocated, which I did without opening it. Story 25. I was 11 years old, and it was a summer night in the village where I grew up. It was common for people to stay outside late because it was windy and air conditioning did not exist there. That night, my sister, my parents, my 2 aunts, and their friends and my grandparents were all sitting outside the front of the house talking. It was a typical village in a developing country, and power outages happened without warning, so it was not unusual when the electricity suddenly went out and the entire area went dark. Not long after, we heard laughter and cheering coming from nearby. From the voices, it sounded like children and women celebrating something. My aunts and their friends decided to walk over and see what was happening, since it was a small village, and they would have known if there was a party. I followed them because it was dark, I was not sleepy, and the night air felt cool. As we walked, the voices grew louder and clearer, and it sounded like there was a fishing party with splashing water and excited chatter. I could see how frightened my aunts were, and I felt the same. The road was lined with tall bamboo, and I had heard enough stories to be on edge and ready to run. As we passed the houses, we realized the voices were coming from the village cemetery, which had a pond where people sometimes fished. We could see lamps, shadows of people holding buckets, and a man casting a fishing net. My aunts decided to go closer and join what they thought was a fishing gathering. The cemetery was surrounded by walls, trees, and bushes, and although I wanted to run home, I felt safer staying with the adults. The strangest part was that the voices continued right up until we reached the cemetery gate, but the moment we stepped inside, everything went completely silent. It was pitch black, and the only sound was an owl hooting nearby. We ran home as fast as we could, and that night the 5 of us slept huddled together in one room despite the heat. I still cannot explain what happened that night. Story 26. I used to be in a punk rock band, and we would often drive out to our drummer's house to practice. He lived in a very secluded old house far off the main road, reached only by several country roads and a long gravel driveway that disappeared deep into a heavily wooded area. We met up, practiced, hung out, and everything felt normal. After packing up and leaving that night, I started driving back down the gravel driveway and noticed that it felt much longer than usual. I kept driving, and the road just continued on and on. According to the clock in my car, I drove straight down that same gravel road for about 5 hours. I even stopped a few times to get out, look around, and try calling my friends to see if someone could come find me, but none of my calls went through. The road stayed perfectly straight the entire time, with empty cornfields on both sides. I could not see any lights from nearby farmhouses or the town where I lived, which was strange because there was almost always visible light pollution at night. It was just total darkness on a road I did not recognize. After what felt like an eternity and being completely exhausted, I blinked and suddenly found myself sitting in my own driveway, my car still idling. Only about 30 minutes had passed, and it was still around 1 ante-meridium. To this day, I have no idea what happened, and I still joke with my old bandmates that they should expect a call one night from a much younger version of me, still lost on that road. Story 27. I used to live on a very remote farm in the middle of Norway, at the end of a fjord that eventually leads out to the sea, and after many hours to civilization and a large city. You can also drive to town from my home, but it takes about 4.5 hours, which I mention only to give a sense of scale. I have 2 neighbors roughly 40 minutes away, but they are rarely home, so most of the time I am alone with my dogs and farm animals, mostly sheep and a few pigs. The land around my home is made up of deep forests, tall mountains, and steep valleys covered in thick woodland and heather meadows. I hunt these lands during hunting season, but there are certain areas I usually avoid because they are extremely remote and difficult to access. This year, however, I found myself struggling financially because the coronavirus pandemic prevented hunters from traveling to my property to hunt deer, grouse, and moose, which I normally rely on to support the farm. Faced with the possibility of losing the farm and sending my livestock to slaughter, I decided to hunt a part of the land I had sworn off after a deeply unpleasant experience when I was 16 years old. I had received an extended quota for deer and roe deer and planned to sell the meat locally to help cover my losses. During the final week of the season before Christmas, I was high on the valley side among heather and sparse pine woods, having left my pickup truck on the gravel road by the fjord and hiking upward with my rifle and hunting dog. I had been moving for about 3 hours when the weather suddenly changed and a thick fog rolled in. As I stopped to check my compass, my dog froze in place and began trembling violently, his tail tucked between his legs, before letting out a cry of pure terror and bolting down the steep slope. I shouted and whistled after him, terrified he might hurt himself or run into wolves, bears, or lynx that inhabit the area. I raised my rifle and looked around, calling out to scare off anything nearby, but there was no response, only an unnatural silence. Then I heard heavy breathing and smelled something like pine resin mixed with wet, filthy wool, a scent anyone who has handled outdoor sheep would recognize instantly. A deep sense of dread settled into me as I slowly backed downhill, hoping my mind was playing tricks on me. Even after putting several hundred meters between myself and that spot, the sounds and smell followed. Desperate, I fired several warning shots into the air. The response was immediate and horrifying. A deep, guttural howl followed by the sound of something massive expressing its rage. A stone the size of a large pack came crashing down from above, missing my head by only a short distance. I ran downhill in blind terror, dropping my pack and binoculars but keeping hold of my rifle out of pure instinct, though I knew it would be useless against whatever was pursuing me. I burst out of the woods onto the gravel road and ran until I was sick, my heart pounding uncontrollably. When I finally reached my car, I vomited and looked around desperately, but there was no sign of pursuit. After calling for my dog endlessly, I forced myself to drive home. When I arrived, my legs barely held me up, and my heart nearly stopped when I saw my dog staggering toward the house, muddy, exhausted, and wide-eyed. I got us both inside and spent the night cleaning up and tending to him, unable to sleep as every sound made me jump. When my partner returned the next day, she commented on how exhausted both my dog and I looked. This happened only weeks ago, and just last week while taking out the trash, I caught that same smell of wet wool and pine resin. I do not know what to do now, and while I refuse to believe this is how my life ends, only time will tell. Story 28. You can tell me I am lying and call this story fake all you want, but I have the scars and the medals to prove it. In the year 2006, I was in a convoy that was hit by an explosively formed projectile. I was in the front vehicle at the time, standing in the turret of our military vehicle, and the explosion threw me into the air. According to the soldiers in the vehicle behind me, I was launched roughly 20 feet upward before landing hard on the pavement. I was treated immediately, but at the time no one would tell me where my driver or team leader was, which was terrifying. We also had an American civilian with us who was injured just as badly as I was. Most of my injuries were to my legs from shrapnel, which I am still having removed many years later, along with shrapnel in my left hand and significant injuries to my face. The civilian suffered severe injuries to his face and hands, including extensive damage to one hand and a shattered elbow, and he was later flown to Germany for further treatment. I remained in the hospital in the secured zone for several days before being returned to my unit, even though I still had serious wounds. For about a month, I reported daily to the medic station to have my injuries treated, which is also how I ended up watching a movie in Russian with my bunkmate. During that time, my leg became badly infected, and one medic even suggested it looked like gangrene, so I was sent back to Fort Hood. The doctor there wanted to amputate immediately, but at 20 years old and very stubborn, I refused. I was sent home with my leg intact and spent 30 days caring for it myself, changing bandages and treating the wounds daily, which was extremely painful. By the end of that period, the infection had completely cleared and my leg healed on its own. When I returned, the doctor told me he had never seen anything like it in his 20 years of practice. I went on to serve another 8 years, but later struggled with depression and alcohol use and eventually left the service. Call me a liar if you want, but the scars remain, and I still have the paperwork from the awards I received. Story 29. When I was a teenager in the Boy Scouts, we would often play games after our weekly meetings while waiting for our parents to pick us up, things like tag or basketball. Our meetings were held in a large old church on the East Coast, likely built in the 1800s, and the building always had an unsettling atmosphere, especially at night. Wandering alone through the empty kitchen or dark congregation hall felt deeply uncomfortable, even though I knew the building well from volunteering there on various projects. I once helped paint downstairs and discovered that behind a loose panel, you could see all the way across beneath the church, between the earth and the first floor, which was extremely unsettling. One evening after a meeting, a friend and I went down into the basement to find a ball so we could start a game. While talking and searching, we suddenly heard the sound of something bouncing. I turned the corner and saw a rubber ball, the kind used for games like dodgeball, bouncing down an empty hallway with plain walls on both sides, as if someone had just dropped it. The ball bounced several times before slowly coming to a stop, and my friend and I just stood there staring at it in fear. I have no idea how long we stood there before someone called out for us, came loudly down the stairs, and retrieved both us and the ball. To this day, I cannot explain how that happened, and even thinking about it still gives me chills. Story 30. My parents and I helped my sister move about 5 hours north, and when we arrived, we learned that a snowstorm was moving in. We got all her belongings inside and partially organized before deciding we had to leave immediately to make it home safely. About 30 minutes into the drive south, the snow became extremely heavy, far worse than anything we were used to, and a state of emergency was declared. We pulled off the interstate and found a hotel next to a fast food restaurant. My dad went inside hoping to find a room, and according to him, the lobby was packed with stranded travelers when a man suddenly started yelling that he had a house about a mile away that could take in 3 people. My dad called out that we were a family of 3, and the man gave him directions. We ended up staying in the home of an older couple who were preparing to move closer to their adult children within the next month. They were incredibly kind, and I remember how strange the house felt, as everything inside looked like it was straight out of the 1960s, even though this happened in the late 1980s. My parents really connected with the couple, and in the morning they helped us dig our car out of the snow and ice before sending us on our way. My dad took down all their contact information because he wanted to send a thank you card and stay in touch. That is when things became strange, because the phone number was disconnected and all the mail was returned as undeliverable. My dad even tried asking the neighbors, but no one seemed to know who he was talking about, almost as if the house and the people who helped us had never existed. Story 31. I was 17 years old and living in a very small rural community in Central California during late spring of the year 1996. My best friend and I were bored and decided to go for a drive, something we did often. The area where we lived was surrounded by mountains on one side and more than 80 miles of flat, sandy valley on the other. It was around 11 post-meridium, and we had been driving along a dirt road toward the valley for about an hour. As we descended from the hills, I noticed a faint reddish-orange glow in the distance. We drove another 20 minutes toward it and eventually reached the source, which turned out to be glowing embers from a fire. Where we were standing, there was absolutely nothing around. No trees, no bushes, no hills, and nothing visible for at least 10 miles in any direction, just flat land. We shined a handheld spotlight around and saw no one and nothing. We decided the safest thing to do was to turn the truck around and cover the embers with dirt by spinning the tires. As my friend backed the truck up, I looked out my open window and saw, less than 5 feet away, the largest man I have ever seen. He was dark-skinned, shirtless, bald, wearing only denim shorts and staring directly at me. He had to be at least 6 feet 5 inches tall and weigh around 300 pounds. I screamed for my friend to drive, and without looking back, he sped off. When I caught my breath, I told him what I had seen, but he had not seen anyone and thought I might be imagining things. He was driving between 50 and 60 miles per hour on the dirt road back toward town, which meant we could reach pavement in about 30 minutes. There had been no vehicles out there at all, no cars, no motorcycles, nothing. And the only way anyone could have been there was on foot. On the way back, there were hundreds of intersecting dirt roads and trails, and we were in a 4-wheel drive vehicle that could have gone almost anywhere. We ended up taking a rarely used road, and just before reaching the pavement near town, the same man stepped out from behind a tree, looked directly at us, and shook his finger and head as if scolding a child. This time we both saw him, and when we looked back again, he was gone. To this day, this is the only experience in my life that I cannot explain, because there is no possible way he could have known which route we would take or gotten there ahead of us without any vehicle. Even now, just thinking about it gives me chills. Story 32. I was hanging out with a girl at her house late at night, and we were sitting in her living room watching a movie while the wind outside was so strong that the windows were rattling. I was already pretty on edge, and after a while I got up to go to the bathroom. She turned on the living room lights to look for her phone charger, which I was very grateful for because I did not want to walk down the hallway in the dark. As I was walking down the hall, I suddenly got that intense feeling of being watched, the kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up and sends a chill through you. There was a bedroom behind me with the door open, and by the light coming from the living room, I saw a small dark shadow run straight across the room. I panicked and ran back into the living room completely shaken. She immediately noticed something was wrong and asked if I was okay, and I told her I was tired and needed to head home. She walked me out to my car, and I finally told her what I had seen. She casually said that the people who lived there before her had a little girl who passed away in the house. My anxiety shot through the roof, but what shocked me most was that she laughed as if I had told her a funny story. Apparently, it did not bother her much at all, and she even told me that once, while she was washing dishes, she saw a black shadow run across the living room out of the corner of her eye. Needless to say, every time I hung out with her after that, it was at my house or anywhere else, because I refused to step foot back in that place. Story 33. My best friend was brutally murdered by someone who has never been identified, with no clear motive. She was missing for a week before her body was found. During that time, I kept having vivid dreams where I was being strangled, and dreams where I kept finding her alive in a basement crawl space above a washer. I told two of my closest friends that I thought I knew what had happened, that she had been strangled and that she was in a basement somewhere. It was the middle of January and extremely cold, so it took search dogs some time to locate her, but when she was found, it turned out that what happened matched my dreams exactly. Both of my friends were deeply unsettled by this. One even told me that if I ever dreamed something bad was happening to her, I needed to call immediately so she could stop it, while the other friend distanced themselves from me afterward. Because I was very close to the victim, detectives spoke with me and planned to give me a lie detector test, which I was willing to take, but it was ultimately unnecessary because I had been with around 10 people more than an hour away at the time of the crime. The dream stopped completely after she was found. I know most people probably would not believe me, but there are at least 2 people who know this is true. 3 if you count her. I rarely talk about it because even now it is incredibly distressing to think about, and those dreams remain painfully vivid in my mind. Story 34. One day when I was young, I was outside playing when a man suddenly walked up to me. He had a long face, was very tall, spoke very softly, and was wearing an absolutely beautiful blue suit. He told me he was looking for his dog that had run off earlier that day, and I agreed to help him look. He gave me more details about the dog, and after some time I managed to find it and bring it back to him. He thanked me, held out his hand, and gave me a piece of a Toblerone chocolate bar. I was thrilled and thanked him, and he simply replied that I was the one who deserved thanks. A little later, while I was eating the chocolate, some people asked where I had gotten it, and I explained that a man had given it to me after I helped him find his dog. They became concerned and said I should return it because I should not accept things from strangers. We went looking for him, but no matter how much we searched, we could not find him, and after about an hour, he was still nowhere to be seen. A kind elderly woman who lived down the street asked me to describe what he looked like, so I told her he had a long face, was very tall, spoke softly, and wore a striking blue suit. When I said that, she looked shocked and went inside her house, then returned with a framed photograph and asked if the man in the picture was him. I said yes, that was the man who gave me the chocolate. She told me that the man was her husband, Johnny, and that he had been dead for 20 years. She told me never to forget what I had seen. I never saw the man again.